Chapter 7. Forgotten Genius. Even though the outside hall was vast, the interior of the Changyang main hallways were even larger. Currently, there were dozens of people strewn about. Among them were a few middle-aged men who were dressed differently that stood out from the rest. Tian led Gian Chen to their seats in the front of the hallway. Those who had wanted to sit at the front had to have a high status in the clan, and since Gian Chen was the fourth son of the clan leader, he had the right to sit at the front. However, his own seat wasn't created yet, so he had to share a single chair with his mother. The lovable Jian Chen sat down on his mother's lap gently and didn't say anything. In a flash, a line of people came streaming into the hall one by one before stopping in front of their seats. Among the newcomers was Jian Chen's third aunt carrying her child along. "Hey, fourth brother, today is the day you take the Saint test. You have to work hard so you don't let second sister down." Changyang Mingyu's pretty face smiled at Jian Chen as she spoke in a soft but enthusiastic voice. Although she was soft-spoken, everyone in the hall had clearly heard who and what she was talking about. "Mingyue!" Her mother looked at her sharply as she spoke with soft rebuke. Changyang Mingyue laughed and stuck her tongue out at Jian Chen. Without any further words, she peacefully sat down right next to her mother's side as her bright eyes blinked rapidly as she sized up the other people in the hall. Soon enough, everybody in the hall were all seated, while they all looked at Jian Chen from time to time, with looks of expectations shown clearly on their faces. The reason why many people were gathered was due to Jian Chen's Saint test. If it was any other child of the clan, then there would not have been such a massive turnout for the Saint test. But Jian Chen wasn't a regular child with no status. He was the child to the clan leader of the Changyang clan, as well as having an innate talent blessed by the heavens. The whole clan had practically placed all of their expectations on this child, hence why, when it was Jian Chen's turn to undergo the Saint test, every clan member would be there. After all, Jian Chen had many different achievements under his belt, and the Saint test would be another important milestone for him. When everyone had settled down, Jian Chen's father, Changyang stepped towards the middle of the hall and sat down on the throne that signified his status as the clan leader with a great blade right next to him. Changyang's eyes stopped on Jian Chen for only a second, but Jian Chen could see the faintest of smiles on it. Immediately afterwards, a voice spoke out, signifying the start of Jian Chen's Saint test. "Deshu, I'm sorry to have you take control of the Saint test ceremony," Changyang said politely towards the elder. The elder looked to be around 60 to 70 years old white-haired man who wore gray clothing. Although his face was full of wrinkles, his eyes were bright and filled with excitement. The old man laughed. "The clan leader is too modest." Walking towards the center now, he carried a smile on his face as he looked at Jian Chen before calling out in a friendly tone, "Fourth master, if you please." Tian looked at Jian Chen with a great look of affection and whispered, "Xianger, please go to where Deshu is standing so he can test for your Saint force." "Okay," Jian Chen said lightly. The clever child got off of his seat, and with his small paces, he slowly approached to where the elder D stood. Without further ado, Deshu lifted his right hand, where a small silver ring began to glow with a dazzling white light. Waving it over, the smallest of trembles could be heard coming from the ground before slowly increasing in sound. Right where there was nothing in front of them, a white stone 1/2 meter large suddenly appeared. It was clear to see that the white stone had been polished countless of times. The entire rectangular-shaped rock, the width and thickness was both at 1 meter long. Looking at the newly emerged white stone, Jian Chen's eyes blinked in surprise. He had felt quite curious about this stone, but Deshu's right hand had also caught his interest. He stared intensely at the ring on his middle finger. It was the ring he had seen from the books. The space ring was made from rare but special materials, and could store items within the space of the ring. The smallest object it could store was 1 meter cubed, while the biggest object it could store was 100 meters cubed. One could store and take out any inanimate object as they pleased. This was an item that was so expensive in the Yuan continent that the common person would not be able to afford it. Seeing Jian Chen looking at the space ring adorned on his middle finger, Deshu laughed. Whenever he had summoned the white stone for the Saint test, Everyone around would give him the same exact look. In fact, he had seen the look so many times he had lost count. Fourth Master, please place a hand on the Saint Stone. Deshu smiled. The Saint Stone is a special rock that could measure the amount of Saint force within a person's body. Within the large Tian Yuan continent, there are many different items that could measure one's personal strength. The Saint Stone used colors to represent a person's strength: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. Having the stone flash red meant that the person was still below a saint in strength, while an orange color meant that the person was at the same level as a saint. The yellow color represents a great saint, and blue meant the person was an earth saint master. Lastly, a purple color represented a heaven saint master. Any rank higher than the heaven saint master, like a saint ruler, saint king, and saint emperor, could not be ranked by the Saint Stone. Hearing Deshu, Gian Chen focused back on the task and extended his hand onto the white stone called the Saint Rock. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on the Saint Rock. They all stood up in anticipation, anxious to find out how strong the gifted Gian Chen would be. When Jian Chen placed his hand on the Saint Rock, Deshu extended his own arm to activate the Saint Rock through seemingly magical means. Immediately, Jian Chen could only feel an odd type of energy pulse from the stone and into his arm. While the energy felt odd to him, it entered his body quite gently, where it slowly circulated around, before pulsing back out from his body and into the stone. Deshu stared at the Saint Rock for any change in color, but after a short period of time, there was no change at all. Not even a single shade of color other than its original one could be seen. How is this possible? The Saint Rock doesn't even have a sliver of color reflected. Deshu couldn't help but cry out in alarm. The smile that had been on his face slowly disappeared from his face and turned to look at Jian Chen's own face with an odd expression. Neither of the two could believe what was going on. Taking note of the look of shock on Deshu's face and the still white Saint Rock, everyone subconsciously came to a realization. Their faces couldn't help but slowly change as they looked at their neighbors, then back at the front. Blinking once, the look of abject bewilderment was noticeable on most people's face, while some people even sighed with looks of pity. Changyang Ba's face grew ugly, while even Bi Yuntian's face drained of color. Neither of the two looked as if they were refusing to believe the news. Deshu gave a gulp. This result was unbelievable to even him. Immediately starting up the Saint Rock again, he had hoped that it was a mistake the first time. But alas, the tree had borne no fruit, and the rock no color. Again, this result was inconceivable to Deshu. The fourth master had been called a gifted genius since he was born, but it had seemed as if he was nothing more than a cripple who couldn't cultivate or use Saint force at all. Deshu couldn't help but give a disappointed sigh as he looked at the silent Gian Chen with a complicated look. He turned around to face Changyang Ba. Clan leader, the results are in. The fourth master is unable to cultivate the Saint force in any way. Upon hearing this declaration, Bi Yuntian's face grew even more pale to the point that it was almost devoid of color. Looking at Jian Chen dumbfounded, she muttered, That's not possible. How can Changyang be a cripple? Right as she finished, her eyes rolled to the back of her head and crumpled down to the ground from her chair. For her son, that was widely regarded as a genius, to suddenly be found as a cripple, she couldn't handle this shocking news at all. No mother in the continent would be able to, let alone a member of a very prestigious clan. As everyone that had gathered around heard the results, they all gasped and looked at Jian Chen with pity and disappointment. Jian Chen's aunts, Yu Fengyan and Ling Long, on the other hand, let loose a breath of air. Seeing the mother and son's unfortunate situation, the two aunts couldn't help but rejoice silently to themselves. Ah, fourth sister, what's wrong? Fourth sister, please wake up. Fourth sister, please wake up. Rushing to her side, Bai Yushuang anxiously tried to awaken the unconscious Bi Yuntian, but to no avail. Hearing Bai Yushuang's frantic yells, Changyang Ba immediately bounded over to Bi Yuntian and began to cry out, Shuang bring Yuan to her bed. Even Jian Chen had rushed to his mother's side without paying attention to anyone else. His right hand was already pressed against his mother's wrist to check for her pulse. It took a few precious seconds, but he had eventually confirmed that his mother was in no immediate danger. Gian Chen looked at his disappointed father amongst the crowd, and even he had felt helpless secretly. With a small sigh, he followed by Yuan, who was carrying his mother out of the hall. Aye. Watching Gian Chen leave, Changyang Ba's face clearly had a look of extreme disappointment. He had placed high hopes on Gian Chen before, but as the expectations were very high, so was the later disappointment. With this result in the end, his fourth son, Tian, was merely a cripple. Clan head, don't pay too much attention to this. Although the fourth master cannot cultivate Saint Force, it doesn't mean he isn't a genius in other aspects or fields. A young male clan member tried to console him. Changyang Ba waved his hand and said sadly, "Let's not mention this topic anymore. Everyone is dismissed." Finishing his sentence, Changyang Ba stood up to leave the hall. Although he had acknowledged the fact that Gian Chen could be a genius in the other fields, as said earlier, but Saint Force was the most important factor in this world. After all, strength is what mattered in the end. The fact that the fourth son of the leader of the Changyang clan was a cripple spread throughout the Changyang mansion like wildfire. Some people regarded this new piece of information with joy, while others were grievous. One thing was sure, however, Changer's status in the clan would rapidly drop after this affair. In a wide, spacious room, Jian Chen sat quietly by the bedside. His tranquil face was dipped downwards, and what he was thinking about was unknown to everyone else. His mother, Tian, still hadn't woke up. Her eyes were still shut as she laid in bed. Aside from Gian Chen and some servant girls, only his third aunt, Yuan, and his second sister, Changyang Yue, were in the room. Chapter 8. Disaster. Looking at the mute. Jian Chen, Changyang Yue blinked a few times. She walked up to Jian Chen's shoulder and said, "Fourth brother, please don't feel too sad. If anyone in the future bullies you, tell your older sister and I'll beat them up." Changyang Yu thought that Jian Chen was feeling sad because he was a cripple and that he didn't have the ability to defend himself from anyone that would mock him. Hearing what Ming Yue had said, Jian Chen couldn't help but lift his head to smile at Changyang Yu. "Don't worry, second sister. I won't be an easy person to bully." Only Jian Chen understood that it wasn't because he was unable to cultivate Saint Force. It was due to the fact that he had been incorporating the Saint Force into the cells of his body. Because of this, his body was essentially an empty shell, with no Saint Force remaining in his body. If he hadn't used this method, then today's Saint test would have had a different result. It was unfortunate that Jian Chen wouldn't be able to explain this situation to people. Even if he wanted to, he wouldn't be able to explain how he came about this method. Not to mention that if he were to talk about Azalet's sword law, then Jian Chen feared that the history of both the technique and himself would become a great problem. Although Jian Chen had understood that because of this situation, his status within the clan had taken a major hit. He didn't care at all for that, however, and had secretly wanted a situation like this to happen. If things had progressed as well as they did just now, then in the future he would be able to leave the Changyang mansion with more ease. If he had still been stuck with the label of a genius, then departing from the mansion would not be as easy. At the very least, as long as he didn't have their approval, they would ignore his trips in and out of the mansion. "Xianger! Xianger!" A voice came calling out from the bed. Jian Chen's mother had finally awakened. Right after hearing his mother call his name, Jian Chen's mind was jolted back to consciousness. He immediately turned around to look at her. "Mother, your son is here. Everything is fine now." Tian had a complicated look on her face as she gasped. "Your mother is fine, but Xianger, I—" As she spoke, a myriad of expressions were shown on her face, ranging from sorrow, sadness, and even pain. "Fourth sister, please don't trouble yourself too much. Tian has been highly intelligent since birth, so although it is regretful that he cannot cultivate Saint Force, but in my opinion, Tian is not so simple. After all, no child in the clan is smarter than him." Yuan was trying to console the still grievous Tian. Tian lifted her head slowly. "I had already understood this fact. Looking at Gian Chen, she gently started to caress the back of Gian Chen's head. Shanger, don't feel sad. What your second aunt said is correct. Although you cannot cultivate Saint Force, you are still a very intelligent child. We still don't know in what areas you would be best suited for. Jian Chen hesitated when he heard his mother speak. Even though his mother was awake, he was not feeling all that much better. In reality, he had really wanted to tell the truth to the people there, his mother most definitely. He wanted to say that he wasn't a cripple that couldn't cultivate Saint Force, but Jian Chen chose to endure this. Mother, don't worry, your son won't disappoint you. Compared to his mother's love for him, Jian Chen had utterly cherished it. He would later spend the whole day by the bedside of his mother before leaving at night. Periodically, Changyang would drop in to see his wife, but he would then leave just as quickly as he came. When it came to Jian Chen, Changyang's attitude towards him had been completely different these days in comparison to before. With each passing time, Jian Chen could clearly see that Changyang had been treating Jian Chen with a colder expression. In the blink of an eye, 4 years had passed after Jian Chen's Saint test. During the days that he wasn't busy, Jian Chen would shut himself in his room to continue training. The amount of training he needed nowadays was considerably longer than in the past. So much longer that sometimes Jian Chen would not be seen walking out of his room for the entire day. In those 4 years, Jian Chen's status in the clan had dropped immensely, as expected. Changyang had been treating him more coldly now, and no one had ever bothered to take the initiative to seek him out first. It was vastly different than from his mother who saw him every day. Her love had never wavered at all. Early one day, Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes from his crossed-leg position once more to show that he had finished last night's training. Immediately extending both arms palm side up, a light round ball gradually came into view. He flipped the beautiful ball into the air from his hands and watched it fall towards the ground where it came to a stop as both his hands were focused on it. Hearing only the slightest of sounds, Jian Chen clapped his tiny hands together as if they were 2 steel plates and started to do push-ups on the normally soft ground, occasionally bringing his head so close to the ground he could kiss it, and even left an imprint on the ground afterwards. Looking at his own hard work with a joyous smile, Jian Chen laughed. Half a year after the Saint test, Jian Chen had already finished the cultivation stage of the first principle of the Azalet sword law. This meant that he officially started to cultivate the Saint Force without having to assimilate it into his own body. His cultivation rate was extremely fast, so fast that in the span of just few years, he had already reached an astounding result. As he was now, he could use the Saint Force that was stored inside of him to reinforce his hands so that they could break through stone without effort. Early in the morning, Jian Chen walked out of his room to wander around the Changyang mansion alone. However, a group of patrolmen were walking around at the time spotted him, with each member having a different expression on their faces. Some had a mocking look, while some looked at him with disdain, but very few looked at him with pity. The fact that Jian Chen was a cultivation cripple had long ceased to be a secret within the clan, and so even the guards that patrolled the mansion had started to look at him differently. But Jian Chen turned a blind eye towards them. His stomach was growling from hunger, and so Jian Chen had decided with a small sigh that it was time to head towards the kitchens. It had been a long time since he had accompanied his mother to the dining halls to eat together. Nowadays, he would go to the kitchens himself to eat breakfast, and would only eat lunch and dinner together with his mother and some of his aunts. When Jian Chen reached the kitchens, over 100 servants could be seen running about. The kitchen was a tremendous mess due to the stove where it stood like a smoking hot steamer basket. "Oh, isn't this the 4th master? The 4th master has come to the kitchens. Hey, this isn't the proper place for someone as pampered as 4th master to be. The kitchens are for lowly servants like us, so why have you come here?" The teasing voice of a 20-year-old servant came calling out. Judging by his odd tone of voice, it was clear to tell that he was mocking Jian Chen. Another voice continued straight after the first servant. "If my guess is correct, then 4th master came down to the kitchens to get some steamed buns. But that's weird. Why isn't the 4th master eating at the dining halls with the rest of the clan? Has he wronged himself and so wanted to eat the steamed buns from the kitchens? These steamed buns are only fit for us lowly servants and guards to eat, however." Another 30-year-old servant continued to sneer at Gian Chen. Upon hearing the two people talk, the other servants in the kitchen all started to look at the spectacle. Both of these servants had the support of some of the superiors. For example, the 20-year-old servant was not only introduced by Changyang Ba's first wife, Ling Long, but he was also the servant of Jian Chen's eldest aunt. Rumors had it that Ling Long had hired him because he was a family relative, but because his body had lacked the power, he could only work in the kitchens. As for the 30-year-old servant that spoke second, his brother is the group leader of the Changyang mansion guards. Hearing the two servants mock him, Gian Chen could only narrow his eyes slightly as anger flashed through his eyes. Biting back any sort of rebuke, he moved towards the giant steamer basket and held his hand out to take off the lid of it before all of a sudden, two giants' hands came out of nowhere and quickly moved the steamer basket away from him. "I should really bring these steamed buns to the guards right away. Our honored guards haven't yet eaten breakfast yet after all." Whisking away the basket, the servant muttered out loud as he exited from the kitchens. "What a crying shame! The fourth lady gave birth to a good-for-nothing cripple." At that last remark, Jian Chen went rigid. At last, the anger within his heart had finally broke free. Without saying a word, his legs blurred as both of his legs stamped across the ground. Reaching the servant with the steamer basket within a few seconds, he raised one fist and brought it down onto the servant's back. Bang! Completely caught off guard, the servant carrying the steamer basket was sent staggering to the ground. The basket he had carried dropped to the floor, and with a great big smash, the nice and plump steamed buns scattered across the floor in 4 directions one by one. Everyone in the kitchen stared at this unforeseen event with a shocked look. Seeing where Gian Chen now stood, no one could believe what they saw. No one had saw clearly how fast or even when Gian Chen had moved. For the 7-year-old fourth master to have brought down the 30-year-old servant with a single punch to his knees, it was inconceivable. Although the steamer basket had been dropped and the food wasted, everyone was still amazed by this show in front of them. "Ha ha ha, Brother Q Lao, you really amaze me. Even though you are an expert that has reached the 3rd layer of Saint Force, yet you were knocked down by the fist of a little child. Did you waste too much energy with a girl last night to become this weak?" Looking at the servant at the ground, the first servant who had made fun of Jian Chen was now roaring with laughter at the second servant. The servant called Chuer crawled up from the ground, his eyes burning with fury towards Jian Chen as the words of his younger servant friend reached his ears. For a 7-year-old child to push him down to the ground, especially a child that was a cripple in the ways of cultivation, this was the ultimate form of humiliation and shame for him. After all, although he had not yet condensed his Saint Force into a Saint weapon, he was still a practitioner that had reached a level far above that of the cripple. Shaking his head in rage, Chuer had forgotten in that moment that Jian Chen still held the status of being the 4th master. With a snarl, he jumped towards where Jian Chen stood and sent a punch towards his stomach. Watching Chuer's fist get closer, Jian Chen had a look of disdain on his face. To him, this punch that he had thrown out was full of mistakes and openings, and so he dodged by moving to the side very slightly to avoid the fist. Throwing himself forward, Jian Chen's right leg arced in a beautiful way and kicked Chuer firmly on the nose. "Ah!" Chuer let loose a blood-curdling scream as he clasped his bloody nose with his hands. Even then, a small, steady flow of blood leaked through his hands. Jian Chen's leg had not been merciful. Chuer's nose had been kicked in and broke. The acute pain in his face had already drained it of color.